Hello, and welcome to the AI First Show. It's the show where we talk about all things AI, about how to get things done, latest AI news about agents, harnesses, models, open source, closed source, all this stuff in between. Let's get right into it. My name is Stephen Barr. This is my colleague Leonardo Gonzalez. We are your hosts. How are you doing? What's the latest?
Lots of LLMs being released. Had my own baby named LLM dropped on the same day as two other LLMs, Opus 4.6 and GPT 5.3 Codex.
So she's in good company.
Yes. I originally wanted to talk about those other two LLMs and speculate about GLM 5 because there was a stealth model that there was a lot of speculation around, but there was good evidence to suggest it was GLM 5. And what do you know? Today it's been officially announced that it was indeed a GLM 5, and there are some interesting characteristics. The fact that all these models are launching around the same time is interesting. It provides some challenges for apples to apples comparison because they're always releasing benchmarks comparing to recent models. And if they release at the same time, they can't compare against each other. So it's left as an exercise to the reader to do that. I'm not going to do that on the show, but I will talk a little bit about benchmarks because I feel like it's an important thing for people to track and understand. And I'm realizing some limitations that need to be addressed, and I think I'm going to be doing some interesting work in that space.
Well, let's. There's a few things that you mentioned that I want to get into each of them individually. First of all, the concept of a stealth model. So we see this come up in various agent frameworks like Open Code Zen. You'll see a model come up that, I've never heard of these people before. I've never heard of this provider name or model name or anything like that. And it's a alias to something that they haven't released yet. And what they're doing is they're gathering feedback and they're testing it out, doing the last bits of tuning and training. And I think also it's partially a marketing gimmick, right? Because if you say, wow, this, secret models, right? Things that are secret and stealth, that sounds kind of cool. That gets some hype going if it's really good. And then also it, it breaks your preconceived notions, I think, is part of it, because I think if Meta ever releases Llama 5 or Llama 4.1 and it's much better, they should do it this way, because there's some preconceived notions about Llama 4 that they need to force people to break out of, right? It's almost like those experiments where they leave the name off the resume and make sure that the evaluators are being fair. So that's the idea of a stealth model. I was at the AI Tinkerers meetup 2 days ago, the one here. And I think people really do, and I was very guilty of this, get stuck in being very attached to a particular model when there's so much innovation happening. And that's one of the things we want to talk about in the show. There is so much innovation and change happening that it's worth exploring, right? There's the exploring and exploiting. And you can exploit and say, I'm going to go all in on Anthropic and their ecosystem, but there's so much happening. And what was the best 1 month might be not even in contention in a month from now.
A lot of these stealth models are driven by OpenRouter. OpenRouter has become kind of a de facto standard for allowing easy swapping of models without needing to provision API keys with different providers. And so they provide this ability for model labs to release cloaked or stealth models, which then can be integrated into other agent harnesses. And, here's a latest one I pulled up called Aurora Alpha. And so the way that stealth models work, and they make this very explicit, that all the prompts and the completions are logged by the provider. So you are providing them with training data, not really training in the technical sense, but more of like a quality assurance data. So this is kind of a public beta. It's a way for them to get production data. It's free. These stealth models are always free. And so it's kind of an incentive for people to try them out. And this also allows them to get some real world usage metrics and maybe debug tool use failures that they wouldn't have been able to see otherwise, because they get widespread adoption from the community because of the excitement of trying out something new, speculating about what it might be. and at the same time taking advantage of the fact that it's free. So this is a common thing. There was actually this post about GLM5 being tested on OpenRouter on February 6th. And I saw it when it came out. I've been playing around with it. There's rampant speculation about what it could be. At the time, people were thinking it was this, it was that. Zipu had come out and said, we are releasing GLM5 in February, so that was a strong indicator. And I did a little bit of sleuthing and investigating, and it seemed there's an interesting thing called polluted Chinese tokens. It's some training data from undesirable sites like gambling or adult sites from China that have some Chinese characters that make their way into certain training data. All of this to say, like, there is some investigative journalism, so to speak, to be able to say, hey, this tokenizer looks like it's coming from GLM. Another strong evidence in that direction. They finally came out and said, yes, Pony Alpha was GLM5, previously Pony Alpha. So they usually do this reveal like, ta-da, yeah, what this stuff model is actually this. So this has been in the wild for 5 days. I've been telling a few people, hey, if you want to try it out, before it's released, here you go. Obviously, there was kind of limited availability. And then earlier this morning, it was made available on their chat site. You could see it on the dropdown. And you could interact with GLM5, but it wasn't yet fully available. They then started rolling it out to their coding plan customers, but only for the max plans. They would have the GLM5 access. And this is a plan that is going up in price. And I'll share a little bit about why that's happening. Originally, they had a 50% discount for the first quarter. I got that. I got a quarter for $90, which is a pretty good deal, $30 a month. And then $180 a month afterwards. So now it's gone up from 180 to 216, not a terrible price increase, but it does show that they're calibrating based on their model capabilities. And so this was the first ability to use it. I hooked it up to my OpenClaw and noticed that it worked well and it worked fast for tool use. And then just about half an hour ago was the official launch announcement. Well, 1 hour ago now. So the weights are now available. People were worried, hey, when are the weights going to be available? And the tech blog that I'll go over briefly. So now it is fully officially released. You can use it via API, at least through OpenRouter. Initially, there's already some other providers giving access to it.
And then because this is on Hugging Face, you could also go run your own copy. And this is something, GLM5, this is not, you probably couldn't run this locally. But if you had a machine with 4 H200s, you could run a reasonable quantization. Or if you had 8 H200s, you could run the full model, which is kind of neat. You could have this running on a single, very expensive, but still a single piece of hardware.
Yeah, one of the interesting things right now is Cerebras has a coding plan that is very backlogged and waitlisted. They're struggling with capacity. Because they deliver very fast inference. And they have GLM 4.7 as their model for their coding plan. But people are speculating on the Cerebras Discord. How quickly are they going to be able to swap it out? It took them a month last time to swap out 4.6 for 4.7. But this time, it's not an incremental difference in size. It's scaled from 355 billion to 744 billion. So it's about twice the size. That's going to have an impact on...
Yeah, especially because these hardware, you have these very solid jumps, right? Where it either fits or you have to start swapping into your RAM from your V. Like there's these very harsh jumps. And so they have to figure out how do they bin this appropriately. We're going to try and get someone from Cerebras on the show. We're still working on that angle. Actually, I should follow up on that contact. We get someone on Cerebras to... we need to know what do they do that's different that of, what's their process of onboarding a model? Are you using
Yeah.
this through, so you're using the GLM coding plan directly, or are you going through Open Router plus bring your own key? Or how are you using this?
I'm using the coding plan. It's a
Okay.
very generous offering for what it provides. I use it for part of my OpenClaw work. I have most of my OpenClaw operations through Kimi's coding plan, just because of the reasoning capabilities. But I reserved GLM for tool use in certain scenarios, and especially for use of their MCP servers that is included with their coding plan. They have a Vision, web search, web reader, and zread, which is for GitHub repositories. I make heavy use of those MCP servers and some wrapper tool use around those MCP servers, and that's the main thing that I use a GLM coding plan for. However, that might change based on what I'm going to show. I'm going to just kind of quickly go through some benchmarks. There are some significant changes with GLM5 and what it can do. I'm going to start with GPT 5.3 Codex. I think they were first by maybe like 20 minutes. Then Opus 4.6 responded. So this is a Codex model, which means it's optimized for long horizon agent harness work for software engineering, as opposed to general purpose reasoning and chatbot use. It also means it's initially only available for the Codex CLI or the Codex app. However, OpenAI has taken a markedly different stance from Anthropic in how they work with the developer ecosystem. And they've allowed OAuth use through their subscription plans to third-party agent harnesses like OpenCode and OpenHands. This means that you can use your ChatGPT Plus or Pro subscription and be basically counting against your usage instead of paying per token. But it also means you get access to these models that are only quote-unquote available through Codex. They will also be available to these third-party agent harnesses if you use them through OAuth through your ChatGPT subscription instead of via an API key.
I wanted to share something really quickly just to talk about where the current market is at and why this is so important. Let me remove this from the screen. I'll put this here. This is from the AI Tinkerers meetup. This was their internal survey. And this is the survey of just the attendees at the Seattle February AI Tinkerers meetup. So looking at this, what is this? Claude is 76 of the people who were there. OpenAI, so this is the Codex models, was 8. Gemini was 8. Grok 0. Open source, that was me. Yeah, and so they literally said, who's the guy or who's the person who is using open source? I raised my hand and said, well, I'm using Kimi K2.5. And they're saying, how is that? I said, well, almost as good as Opus 4.5. Now that Opus 4.6 is out, I think that's another leap forward. But Kimi K2.5, I put $20 into Open Code Zen, and I haven't hit it yet over a couple of days. Whereas Opus, you hit $20 in one conversation.
And that's the thing that is not sustainable for these Western labs, is to be charging these 8x or 10x price premiums when the gap is essentially closed between the open and the closed models.
Well, and that's what they said. They said, so what is your heuristic of what model to use? I said, well, if my boss is paying, sure, I'll use Opus. But if I'm paying, there's an analogy to the mechanics and like, how much brake cleaner do you use? Well, depends on if it's the shop brake cleaner or my personal can, right?
Yeah.
So it depends on who's paying. But eventually, there's going to be. Well, I'm also have my other foot in the FinOps community, and we're figuring this stuff out, right? There are going to be better metrics for this stuff. Right, right now, it's kind of just
the metrics are broken right now, and that's what I'm going to be devoting a lot of my interest and passion into over the next few weeks and months.
Well, I meant employer metrics. Like if you have a bunch of employees and you can see what models they're using. Right now, we don't know how to track that, but that's going We're going to figure that out, right? You say, hey,
Yeah,
you don't need to use Opus for everything.
And we're going to have systems that can figure it out for you, is
Mm-hmm.
what I was alluding to. I don't know. I have some ambitious ideas, but I'm going to see how far I can take them. The first one I realized is we need better benchmarks, because I was going to try and come up with some orchestration system, and there's several out there that work with decomposition and multi-agent coordination, but they're not totally focused on Pareto frontier optimization of cost, speed, and intelligence, which is one thing that I would like to focus on. Where can you send your tasks that are complex, that require high-level reasoning, versus what are the fast mechanical things, versus what do you want to save money on, or where do you find the balance between those three? That, I think, could be handled by some orchestration system for you, so that you don't have to individually be swapping out models as you're doing different tasks as you get into longer horizon work. However, for that to really be proven, we need benchmarks to demonstrate that. And the current benchmarks are terrible for long horizon work. I'm going to show a little bit about that. But let's work with the benchmarks that we have right now. And I'll talk about them briefly. So SweBench originally was a benchmark that had some Python code with some issues, GitHub issues. It was very problematic. So it had a revision, which was SweBench verified. And it was verified by humans to filter out low quality issues, and it was better. But there's still this issue of contamination, data contamination, and that is that models can train on things that they find on the internet, which means they can train on things that are publicly available. So we've got a public set for this SweBench Pro, which I believe OpenAI actually came out with. They have a held out set that is private. And so that is one approach to protecting against contamination. That is to have some data that is not public, but then it means that people can't benchmark it themselves. They have to go through some central benchmarking authority. So that's SweBench Pro. It is GitHub issues on Python. One notable difference here, at least looking at apples to apples comparisons between GPT 5.2 Codex and GPT 5.3 Codex, is not only this slight bump in accuracy, but that is the great reduction in output tokens. So with Codex, you can dial up and down the reasoning effort. And a lot of people are preferring GPT Codex over Opus because it doesn't go off the rails as much. It is a little bit more grounded. It can follow instructions better, but it is slower. It takes a long time to think and think well. A lot of times that trade-off is worth it, but it depends on what you're doing. But now the fact that we can, with 45,000 tokens, get the same kind of accuracy as what before would require 90,000 tokens. That means we're having a 50% efficiency, or 100% improvement on efficiency there. That's a huge deal. That means that we can run GPT 5.3 Codex in coding harnesses without having to wait so freaking long for something to actually produce results. I'll talk about now Terminal Bench. People have seen that benchmark a lot. That is not actually a coding benchmark. That is more of an agentic tool use benchmark. They spin up a Docker environment and they throw a model at the command line and say, have at it, do this thing, accomplish this task. And they don't look at code diffs like they do with SweBench. They look at the environment state. Did you accomplish the thing that you were trying to do, manipulating things? So this is more of an agentic tool use inside of an environment. It seems to have been replaced, Tau Bench or Tau Squared Bench, which we'll see if that has a resurgence with some future iteration. But this is now one of the go-to benchmarks for agentic tool use. Notable bump here. From 64 to 77. So this is definitely something to keep in mind for a long horizon agentic tool where you want to automate processes, where you want to manipulate environments. Web development, this is a little hard to try and get some handle on the differences between subjective aesthetics between the two models. I still am hearing the chatter is that it's not that great for front end work, that people are preferring Gemini for creating a really nice front end. If you're going to separately create like a back end with an API and then a front end that implements the API client, people usually use those two models. If you're doing a one-shot full stack thing, then you might, I mean, this still looks like LLM AI slop to me, purple gradients, it obviously vibe coded.
But it's not, I don't find it off-putting necessarily. It just seems
it's not
like
terrible.
it's out of your way.
It's just
right?
cliche.
Yeah, but that's okay. I don't mind cliche, right? Like sometimes you go into a Subway sandwich shop, you're like, I want this to be predictable. I don't want an artisan experience right now. I want the 6-inch tuna sandwich.
Yeah. So it's an interesting thing. I think it's probably not its strong point, but we're seeing what its strong points are. Look at this huge bump in OS World Verified. Now this is using vision to complete computer tasks. So again, tool use, but also with visual reasoning. Think browser use navigation or computer use navigation. This is a tremendous boost. So I think I haven't seen this realized yet in applications or agent, use cases, but this is a dramatic increase. So I think if you look at Claude Cowork, and there's a bunch of open source alternatives that came out within a day, this is going to be a contender for what Model E wants to use for this scenario. Interactive collaborator. The Codex app, I tried that. It's an interesting app. It abstracts out the code. It's not an IDE. It could be pointing toward the future, but there's not enough information there for my taste. It's a little bit of a black box, but it is interesting. And they used Codex to train and deploy Codex. I saw a really funny post by someone making fun of this, saying, oh yeah, we used Vim to edit Vim, and it's amazing, Like we use an editor to create an editor. It's not as revolutionary as the sensationalist AI is creating itself kind of thing. It's just a tool, and so obviously you're going to use a tool to create that tool.
I think the benchmark comes from like the compiler universe. Like when you build a compiler that can self-host, that's kind of a good thing. But that's at the lowest level, right? Obviously, you're going to use your tools to make other tools. Just like, if you're woodworking, you're going to start making jigs, and you're going to use those jigs to do your woodworking.
So that was GPT 5.3 Codex. Minutes later, Opus 4.6 came out. This is not a coincidence. I don't know how.
This is only a week ago. Wow.
Yeah. I don't know how they managed to keep tabs on each other, and they probably had it like ready to fire and were doing like last minute thing. And you can imagine the enmity or just the corporate warfare going on between Anthropic and OpenAI, evidenced by their Super Bowl ads. Yeah, Anthropic taking jabs at OpenAI for putting ads in, but misrepresenting how they do it. And so they're definitely at war with each other, like a Pepsi and Coke kind of situation. And so somehow they managed to release within minutes of each other, where Opus is probably just waiting for them to pull the trigger and say, okay, they released it, so now we have to release so we can steal the limelight and people can, not all of a sudden flock over to use their new model because now they have to choose, which of the two new models to use. So that's a very strategic play. They probably had it ready for a while and we're just waiting to release it on the same day. Opus 4.6. I see it as more of an incremental improvement. Nothing totally mind-blowing there. You can look at some of the benchmarks. Funny, some of the benchmarks are even lower than in Opus 4.5, like Sweet Bench Verified, which I mentioned, right? You do see a noticeable bump on like Terminal Bench, better tool use there, better tool use for OS World. But these are, minor bumps, maybe a little bit bigger here for Browse Comp. But if you're just kind of scanning down this list, the main thing I see here different is problem solving with ArcAGI 2. That's like a huge bump. Everything else is a little bit of an incremental increase.
Well, and this also brings up a bit of a question, right? Is we're assuming that these tests are linear in gradation, whereas they might not be, right? Like there's some teachers that say, okay, no one gets higher than a A minus, right? No one will ever score an A. And so maybe some of these tests, like I don't know if it's perfectly linear and an 85 is exactly 5. The difference between 80 to 85 is maybe not the same from 85 to 90. That might not necessarily represent the same increment.
Yeah.
But that's why we run so many tests, right? Because it's not well fleshed out yet. Have you been using Opus 4.6?
Yeah, I've used it a bit. It's still very early to have really grounded vibes, opinion, or experimental evidence. I am building out an unofficial benchmarking suite where I will have a spec-driven project to throw at a model or at a harness and see how well it performs. That takes a while to really do well. But yeah, these incremental increases I noted a while back too are not a big deal. What is a big deal is when you see like a doubling of problem solving, or humanities last exam, and not exactly a doubling, but at least a 30% improvement. Yeah. And there's always the with tools and without tools for that one, interestingly enough.
Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I would say that the main compelling headline about Opus 4.6 is the context window. There's a 1 million token context window. So people are making a big deal about that, look at this long context retrieval. They're comparing against Sonnet, and I don't know why they're not comparing against Opus 4.5. Oh, because they're looking at 1 million context, right? So Opus 4.5 didn't have 1 million context.
That was 250.
Yeah, and so Sonnet 4.5 did have 1 million token context. And a lot of people say, like, one thing is to say that you have a long context, and another thing is to actually use it well. They have these, what they call needle and haystack tests, where like you have a super long context. Are you able to find relevant information in that huge context when prompted? And so that is this long context retrieval 8 needle test here. And you can see that it just does considerably better than Sonnet. So this is a powerful model for a long context. We'd have to try and compare it against Gemini and its ability to handle long context to have a really interesting comparison. But I would say that's the main compelling change about Opus 4.6. It's not these incremental changes. Maybe, that there's reasoning or knowledge, or maybe train more data into it and ability to reason. But it doesn't really reflect in its coding capabilities, except for this context thing, which if you're dealing with very large context, this is probably going to be a market difference for you.
Well, I think that a side effect of the context window, and I've been using Opus 4.6 since it came out, using open code, so I haven't changed anything else about my setup, but using Opus 4.6 versus 4.5, I found that it's a lot more token efficient. And so in addition to the long context, it seems to be, whatever it's doing internally, being a lot more efficient about what tools it's calling, what it's using. Mm-hmm. I'm watching the cost on the open code sidebar, and the cost is growing a lot slower with Opus 4.6 compared to Opus 4.5. Open 4.5 was a cost vacuum. And this may be, again, it may have been smarter tool use. So it's not retrying or learning the syntax of certain commands through trial and error. It might be reading the manual better. Because I have, in my workflow, I have a lot of custom bash commands that Opus, or that my tools know about. And part of it is, okay, check the manual real quick, understand how to read it, and then go do your thing. And I found Opus 4.6 wastes a lot. It's a lot more efficient for it to learn those tools.
Yeah, that is a very interesting thing. And when you have to try and compare things, an important thing to look at, because you can look at the price per token, but then you have to look at the tokens per task. And if you have an efficiency increase like we saw here with GPT 5.3 Codex using half as many tokens, that's a huge deal. And people don't really surface that to their mind as much as maybe a 50% price drop in a per token API cost, that it effectively has the same results. So token efficiency is a big deal for looking at your total cost of operations. I'm curious, and this is something we'd have to look at for open code and other agent harnesses, adaptive thinking. Anthropic has some very peculiar things about their models. They have the thinking effort, which you can choose the levels, but then they have extended thinking, which is separate from that. And now it seems like they have this adaptive thinking where Claude decides whether it needs to do extended thinking or not. And things like that could play into efficiency of how many tokens you're using, for sure.
And that's where I need to look into it also could be improvements to open code's API support for Claude, because right now I was using open code I was using Opus via Bedrock, but then I also have experimented with Opus via Anthropic's API, both through open code. So that could also be part of it, is the flexibility over the API. I don't know if the Bedrock API immediately exposes every setting that Anthropic gives you. I think they try to be close feature parity, but I don't know how close they are. Although Bedrock did have Opus 4.6 on the exact same moment, so that is definitely coordinated.
This is a fluid situation. It is changing before. So they are actually deprecating this whole thinking type. Right here, they're saying like before they only had the binary choice, right? Enable or disable extended thinking. And now they have another choice, but it's actually deprecated the old binary choice. So now it looks like for those that are getting in the weeds with directly interfacing with these APIs, they have a adaptive thinking type, and then the effort parameter. The other thing that I noticed here is where you will be able to have your fine-grained control. These are all things that also would be interesting to automatically coordinate. Obviously, this is kind of co-evolved with Claude Code as their default harness, but these third-party harnesses that can make use of these models and can follow these changes to their parameters and their API specs can also be made to use them even more intelligently than whatever comes out of the box with the Claude Code. So something to look at, especially because this is an important area to look at now, is how far do you want to dial up that thinking, and what is the result in latency and in cost and in intelligence and quality.
And that's where using agents come in there, because that's where you really have your chance to customize the model and the parameters of the model, right? So you could have your main agent. Like your main agent should basically be a dispatcher, right? Where just like a good boss isn't necessarily doing everything themselves, but they're dispatching to the person who's the best at it on their team. And you could have models where okay, if I have a really complex problem, send it to this agent, which might be the same model, but with different parameters. It might be with thinking super dialed up. And you could say, give me a plan using the thinking super dialed up, and then you can get your army of Kimmies and Sonnets to go and implement the individual pieces of it.
Absolutely.
I wanted to share a post that actually just came out while we're in this kind of metric space. This was called "The Singularity Will Occur on Tuesday." Let me steal the screen for a second. I think this has some really interesting metrics in it that might be worth tracking. This was interesting. This is talking about MMLU over time, over like a lot of the frontier models. So interesting that we went in June 2020 at 43.9 to November 2025 at 90.8 with Opus, kind of saturated that test. This one is interesting that I hadn't seen it put so clearly in terms of output tokens per dollar. That we're at Opus 4.6 is at now at 40,000 of output per dollar, same as on the output pricing. But like, look how much better value we've gotten over time, with the one anomaly being Gemini 2. That's a good deal in terms of output.
Oh yeah.
And then other thing that like we were saying, the frontier model release intervals in days. So starting from 900 days between GPT-3 and ChatGPT, but then, okay, GPT-4 comes out 100 days later, Claude 2 100 days after that, 3 Opus 89 days later, and all the way here from Opus 4.5 to 4.6 is 73 days. Now, these aren't necessarily all the same size steps, but it is showing just the speed at which these frontier models are evolving. We've only had GPT. This is neat things to look on here, and then put on this graph. This is looking at the projected tokens per dollar evolution into the future, where what'll happen when we're at this point in just a couple of years of tokens per dollar, and the release gaps are getting smaller. This is also looking at
although I don't know, I'm a little skeptical about focusing too much on tokens per dollar because not all tokens are created equal. It's like authors that would charge by the word.
But it's still, well, I guess that comes to sometimes an army of really cheap work is a pretty effective way of doing things.
I mean, I think at some point, if we could have some base unit of the economics of unit work, and then you look at tokens per unit of work and dollars per token, then you'd be able to do the transitive calculation of dollars per unit of work. And that would be a really interesting metric.
So some kind of normalization.
Different models, because different, take different amounts of tokens to accomplish the same task. But right now it's kind of, because we don't have those adapters, we have to deal with these dollar tokens. So let's take a look at some of this pricing, because I think Anthropic is in trouble here. So as I mentioned, GPT 5.3 Codex is still only available through Codex and maybe through third-party harnesses with OAuth. So it's not yet available via API. But I think we can assume that it's going to have the same price as GPT 5.2 Codex. I think that would be a safe assumption, that it's not going to be more expensive. And right now that is $1.70, and I'm not going to get into caching because that's just a layer of complication. It has some effect. But for an order of magnitude comparison, $1.75 per million input, $14 per million output. If you look at Opus 4.6, instead of $1.75, we've got $5. And instead of 14, we've got 25. That is a significant difference. You're paying twice as much. And what are you getting for that? If you look at these benchmark scores, GPT is leading. If you look at SweetBench Pro, if you look at Terminal Bench 2, if you look at OS World, these benchmarks show that GPT 5.3 Codex is performing better than Opus 4.6, despite costing half as much. So this should give people pause that just by default have been using Anthropic because they think it's the best coding model. It's a little bit expensive, but I want to use the best. Why should I use anything that's cheaper? Like, hey, all of a sudden, and this is not some crazy, quantized cheap Chinese model. This is OpenAI's model. It is performing better and it costs half as much. It's going to give people pause.
Yeah, no, I truly hope so. And I think it's one of those, understanding the mindset and understanding, I think it's very well worth on the individual level to gear yourself up for flexibility and don't lock yourself into one particular ecosystem or tool chain. Like, by all means, if Claude Code is working for you, use it. But look at the shim that you made, right, for using OpenRouter, or just using other models with Claude Code, or check out OpenCode, OpenHands, any other agent harness. Just don't totally lock yourself in to one harness because it's not clear. There's no clear winner yet.
And then despite what harness you use, you should not be married to a model. So maybe you'll have a preferred harness. Maybe you'll find that Droid leaps beyond anything else, or that you want the extensibility of OpenHands and be able to work with their SDK, or that you like the OpenCode ecosystem and the speed at which they're maturing. But the main power and value of those agent harnesses is they are all independent from model labs, and by their nature, by their DNA. They are built to allow you to swap providers and to swap models. And that's really important, because otherwise you're beholden to some pricing model that is maybe divorced from the value that you're receiving, as evidenced by this comparison between Anthropic and OpenAI in their latest model. And especially as evidenced by now what I want to get into, just to wrap up, GLM-5, which I have not really gotten into the trenches with, but I've started using through OpenClaw. I saw that it was snappy, it worked well, and it worked quickly. There's quickly a couple of US providers that came up. Novita, unfortunately, it's a little quantized. I don't know that it's that quantized though. The throughput on these is okay. It's not anything crazy, but it's not terribly slow either. I think we may eventually see more and more inference providers. This is something you can try and run yourself, quantize, or throw up a cluster. The fact that it's an open weight model means that there's a lot of possibilities and options. It is a larger model that's going to be trickier to work with, but it's at least smaller than K 2.5. It's not a trillion parameter model. But the pricing. So we're talking about 1.75 versus 5. This is 1. You see they're starting to approach a similar. We're looking at, I think it was 4. What was it? No, 14 versus 25. And here we're looking at 3. So very, very different pricing on the output. Looking at $3. That's an order of magnitude from like Anthropic's 25. So we're not just looking at like, hey, that's half the price. No, you're looking at almost 1/10 the price. Consistently, that has been GLM's calibration is near 1/8 of the price of Anthropic's models. And if you look at the performance, it's interesting. They're continuing to close this gap. On Humanity's last exam was interestingly they're above GPT 5.2 extra high. They're above Gemini 3 Pro. This is a big deal. This is indicative of advanced reasoning and tool use. I mean, you look at the with tools and without tools, and that is a very interesting distinction for this benchmarks. You'll see they're not a leader without tools, but with tools, they give them the ability to use tools, and it is the biggest jump out of any model. So that has been one of GLM's strengths from the beginning, is tool use. And so now we can see the reasoning capability combined with tool use, allowing them to stand above frontier models for 1/8, 1/10 of the price. We're looking at near parity for Sweet Bench verified. Again, there's I think limited value in this benchmark. It's just used to kind of compare apples to apples, but I don't think it's really indicative of real world. There's Sweet Bench multilingual, which at least addresses the fact that Sweet Bench verified is only Python. So now we look at more front-end stuff, as well as Rust and Go and other languages. So I consider this more relevant for full stack and everyday work. And you also see, hey, this is beating OpenAI's model. This is near parity with Anthropic's model for on Sweet Bench multilingual. Terminal Bench, right? I mentioned Terminal Bench. Interestingly enough, I think this is, because this is comparing against 5.2. So we know that GPT got higher scores for 5.3 Codex than Anthropic's. But basically, you're seeing small percentage differences. And these small percentage differences really don't correspond to an 8x or a 10x price increase. So this is definitely a reason to give pause to why you would want to choose one model over the other. You can look at Browse Comp, and it's a leader from all the other models. So this is a big deal. The tool use is crazy. Look at this. This is GLM 4.7 is the dashed bar, and then the solid bar is GLM 5. And you can see that it has closed the gap and passed Opus 4.5. Obviously, they compared against 4.5 because 4.6 is so recent. But hey, before they were behind and now they were ahead. Before they were behind, now they're near parity. This change is closing the gap. So I would say that this release is a main closing the gap for GLM compared to Anthropic at an incredible competitive advantage of being 1/8 of the price.
Well, you know what I think we should do in a future live stream, like maybe later this week, is we should see if we can get GLM5 running on like a vast.ai machine. Because I was thinking, from a corporate perspective, okay, it's going to take forever to onboard Z.ai as a vendor and sign up. I used to work with all this HIPAA data, right? No way it's happening. That's going to take forever. But if you're already using a hyperscaler like AWS or GCP, you can rent a machine that could self-host GLM5.
Yeah.
And that's not that hard to do.
Never rent a GPU from AWS or GCP. They charge too much of a premium. But like you said, there's third-party markets or cloud-specific providers like Nebius.
But I guess like in a situation where it takes like sometimes the hardest thing to do is just get a new software vendor approved. And so if you already have a BAA with AWS, for example, then give it a shot, just experiment. And then you can figure out, what's that value to you. And then maybe you say, okay, would it be worth this at a quarter of the price on Vast or Modal or something like that? But you're not like locked in to just going in like with Z.ai. You don't necessarily have to use them because that, again, they're open models. You can just self-host it. I wouldn't recommend necessarily buying the box that can run GLM5. That would be a huge capital expenditure. Like you need it when that happens.
And OpenRouter I think is great exactly for that reason. It lowers the barrier to entry to experiment and try new models. And the fact that you have an OpenRouter API key means you can experiment with GLM5, and with the right harness or the right shim, you can specify a US-based for data residency requirements or whatever. It might not be as secure and private as on-prem inference, but it is an alternative to OpenAI and Anthropic because you're still doing US inference if you're going through Fireworks or Novita or providers like that. And you don't have to onboard a new provider. So this is, I think, going to be interesting. This was just released. People, maybe some people have been playing with it as a stealth model for a week, but most people still haven't even configured it. I told my OpenClaw to update itself, and it did. So now I'm using GLM5 for
nice.
A transcription tool use. I was having issues with transcription where I would leave voice notes via Discord to my bot. And sometimes, I don't know, it would fire guardrails on Kimi, and it would say, this has been blocked for safety or something.
Oh, weird.
And so I'm like, hey,
you could run that locally. I mean, transcription isn't too heavy.
No, I am running transcription locally.
I see. Okay.
But whatever handled the results of the transcription, something about the format in which it was returned was, firing off alarm bells for Kimi. So I'm like, hey, you know what? Anything that is dealing with have GLM handle the tool use and then take the output and then pass the output along to Kimi. And that seemed to work well. So it was interesting because it was not a single place that I needed to swap out GLM 4.7 for GLM 5. It was like maybe 8 different places, but OpenClaw found them all and did them all.
Interesting. Well, let's try later in the week a self-hosted GLM5. See if we can get that to work. And I think that'd be interesting, right? If we have it running for an hour, see how many tasks we could push through it before we have to shut it down. I think that'd be kind of fun. All right, well, let's wrap this one up. I think we've talked quite a bit for today. We'll get this episode shipped. Please join our Discord, follow us on LinkedIn, on YouTube, on Instagram. We've got good content coming out, good highlights from some of our other show. And in our Discord, you can ask us questions. You could give us suggestions for topics you want to cover. We've had some great discussions in there as well. So links are all in the video description right down there. And we will see you soon. Thanks.
Thank you.